Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. Today I have a special guest, Phil Lollar. So most people would be familiar with you for your work on Avengers and Odyssey, Phil. So how did you first get to start working with focus on the family in general, and then Avengers and Odyssey in particular?
Well, I started working at Focus on the Family by doing the traditional route of applying for a job. Basically, what happened was I was working at a film services company, and a friend of mine who was a very strong Christian knew that I was interested in writing, and knew that I was interested in performing, and knew that I was interested in creating art, and especially doing so in a Christian setting, if possible. And he said, "Have you ever considered writing for the radio?" And I said, "Writing for the radio? How do you write for the radio? Who does that? Especially these days." And he said, "Well, there's an organization called Focus on the Family, and they are looking for a writer. They were advertising for a writer." And I said, "Wow, that's kind of interesting. Did they say what they needed?" And he said, "Yeah, they want you to send in script samples." And I said, "Script samples? Scripts for what?" And he said, "I don't know, just send them in a script sample." So I sent them. I sent Steve Harris, who was the one who put the ad out. I sent him a sample of a script that I had written, and he liked it. He called me up, and we interviewed, and I started working. And so working at Focus, and so I was actually hired to write radio drama. I did other things for the first about 8 or 9 months, almost a year, prior to doing any Odyssey, prior to doing any radio drama. But in fact, I wrote another radio drama while I was there. And I've forgotten what it was called, but we did that one too. And then after that, I moved on to Odyssey and pretty much stayed with Odyssey full time.
So it says on the Avengers and Odyssey Wikipedia page that you directed over 300 episodes. That's a lot of episodes. Do you have any favorites? Any ones that you really liked or have fond memories of?
Well, I have fond memories of all of them. I always liked the history episodes. Those were always a lot of fun, and I always liked the BTV episodes. They were a blast to direct. There were some that I really liked that had really heavy duty performances in them. The whole Blackard saga was a lot of fun to direct. I directed most of that. And all of this is. I mean, um, I have favorites of all of them. They're all my children, so you can't really pick a favorite child. So, I mean, I wrote a whole bunch of them. I've written, I think, more than 200 of them, and directed more than 300 of them now. So, I've been very blessed, and I've been very grateful for the opportunity, and glad that God was able to use me in that way.
Yeah, one thing that unfortunately slipped my mind when I interviewed your colleague Paul McCusker was, how did Paul ever get cast as that weaselly politician?
Philip Glossman,
Yeah,
yeah.
Philip
Well,
Glossman.
I insisted. To be quite, it was my idea. I insisted. I said, "You need to do this," and he didn't want to do it. And I said, "No, you're going to do it," because fortunately I was in charge of casting at that point. So I said, "Yep, you're going to do it." He said, "No, I don't want to." I said, "Yep, you're going to do it." And I say this with all the love I can in my heart for Paul, because I really love him. He's a great guy, but he has the kind of voice that really fit that character. And so I thought, this is a guy who really, he needs to be playing this part. And Paul has, Paul's a lovely man and an extremely talented guy, and I do love him to pieces. But he can be. We've gotten into a lot of snarky wars with each other, and he's an expert at it. He's real good at it. So but if I can create a character that's snarky like Paul can be snarky, then he's going to fit right in there. But again,
Yeah.
he's not in any way in real life like Glossman at all. He's a wonderful man. But
Yeah.
I pretty much insisted, "You're going to play this guy."
Um, one other question about some of the episodes that you directed. There was one you directed called The Power, which was the last episode with Nicholas Adamsworth. Now, one of the things that I wondered about was, he was kind of this nice, cute little boy. He helps Eugene out. He becomes a real bad guy. What was the rationale for turning him into a bad guy?
Well, I think that what we were doing with that is, if memory serves, the idea that he was so intelligent, Nicholas was, and he had come under the influence when we first met him um, of Richard Maxwell, and and was kind of delivered from that for a while. But then we sort of lost track of him, and I thought, well, somebody who's that intelligent would certainly get involved in, especially when you're young, would still be highly susceptible to being influenced by bad behavior, and other people who are a little bit older than you are who want to get you involved in bad stuff. And so I think it was just a matter of taking all those things together, all the ideas that he is capable of being seduced to the dark side, as it were, and then being so smart that he's usually smarter than anybody else in the room, and that happens to a lot of young kids who are really, really super smart. They get bored, and when they get bored, they fall into bad company. And the old adage of the idle mind is the devil's workshop really is true, and I think it's especially true for super bright kids like Adam, like Nikki was. So I think that was sort of the idea behind it, and then just the tragedy of that too. I think the tragedy of that appealed from a dramatic standpoint, from the writing and the directing standpoint, that the tragedy of somebody who has so much potential being seduced into doing bad stuff, and then giving his remarkable brain over to bad things instead of good stuff.
Yeah. Now you mentioned that you particularly like the historical programs. One of my favorite that you directed was the St. Paul two-part episode, St. Paul Voyage to Rome, and I think there was the follow-up where he's in Rome.
Yeah,
it's actually four. It's four. That's right.
Yeah.
They were excellent. And how did you get the guys that you got to play the characters were so good. The guy that played Paul just fit the role perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, part of it is due to casting, and so we had a little bit more flexibility when we first started out with Adventures in Odyssey. We didn't have a whole lot of flexibility in terms of casting because we didn't pay a whole lot of money for the actors. We weren't filled flush with cash, and so we had to get. We were very fortunate to be able to get this supremely talented cast that we got. And we used them, of course, over and over and over again. And then by that time, we were expanding a little bit more. The programs were getting a little bit bigger. We wanted to do more historical programming, and we had a little bit bigger budgets and stuff. So we were able to expand and go out and kind of audition people. And to be kind of very honest with you, that was many, many years ago, and I don't quite remember all the whole audition process, but I do remember wanting to make sure that we got, at a certain point, and St. Paul was certainly part of this, wanting to get people who really fit what I was hearing in my head. So when you write stuff, you put stuff out. This, I think, goes for all of the writers on Odyssey who also direct their own shows. That is, they hear it in their head. They're writing it down. They hear it in their head, and they want to make sure that they're going to get a person who comes in and plays the part the way they're hearing it in their head. And what's wonderful also is when you get. I just did an interview yesterday actually with Earl Bowen. We were talking about this, about the Blackard Chronicles. Yay! There are 2 series of books that I've written there that I'm writing that are coming out, and we were talking about the Blackard Chronicles. And one of the wonderful things that Earl said was that it was a pleasure to work on Odyssey because we did know what we wanted, and we could tell him. And I said, one of the pleasures of working with Earl, of course, is that he is a great actor and a flexible enough actor to be able to, if we have ideas in the studio, if we have something that we want to do, we want to say a line a certain way, or you're not quite getting that line here, try it this way, or things like that. They can just pick up on it like that and do what we need them to do. And so we've been very blessed with those kinds of actors.
Yeah. So 2 questions. What was the inspiration for turning Julius, Paul's guard from Acts, into having a son, and then having this really interesting backstory of how his son becomes a Christian?
Yeah.
And then the other question is, when you write a radio drama, what are the things you start with, and how does it, if there is such a thing as an average episode, how do you move from the idea to the actual finished product?
Okay, for the first part of your question, it's an interesting question, because when you do a historical drama, especially if you're doing something that's based on biblical information, or even just about any story from ancient history, you only have certain elements of the story available to you. And you've got to get those elements right, of course, because especially in a biblical story, you want to make sure all the facts are correct and all your ducks are lined up in a row. But what we're given in Scripture is not the whole story. We don't get every single detail of the story. We get the pertinent points of the story. There are some stories in the Bible that we get all the pertinent details. The life of David is filled with just small, intimate little details of his life. But there are certain parts of most of the Bible stories, the history parts of the Bible, don't give us everything in the Bible. And so the thing that I do when I write historical dramas that way, when I'm adapting a historical, factual historical tale into a dramatic script, is to look for ways, look for moments and ways and characters that may or may not be mentioned, but you kind of extrapolate from logic as you're reading the text, and you're kind of looking at it and you're saying, it could be possible that this happened. And then you also bring in dramatic license to it and say, if it's possible that that could happen, if Julius it's possible that he could have a son, well, why not make his son this, and this? Why can't we do it this way? And I may have also actually, and this is something, this is the big trap of doing that, by the way, is that if you do historical dramas, you better write down your sources, because folks like you will come back later on and say, where did you find that? How did that work? What happened? And then I'm going, I don't remember. I was just writing the show. But I think that's the way that kind of played out. It was sort of like, there's a possibility, and as long as it doesn't counter anything that actually happens in Scripture, then you have free dramatic license to make that work. So you can do lots of characters like that. You can put them in the show, and that just makes the whole thing a whole lot richer and a lot more interesting to listen to. So you have this whole backstory of all these different characters and who they may have become in history. We don't know. But meanwhile, we're also telling the story for the benefit of the listeners right now, the people who are actually listening. And you can use that as a dramatic story to get a point across, or to talk about the relationships between characters. As for the second part of your question number 2, you go from idea to fleshing out idea, write a couple of lines about it, and then from there, just the technical aspect of it is you sort of write a log line for it, and you see if you can get a beginning, middle, and end. Is this worthwhile? Does it have enough? Does the idea carry enough with it to be able to flesh out into a complete story? And then you just start developing it. There's a whole process that everybody goes through. Everybody basically does the same process like I just described. You start putting flesh on it. Can this happen? Can that happen? Where can we take this idea? But also from the standpoint of an Odyssey, a show like Odyssey, where theme is so important. Each episode has a theme to it. They're all very thematic. You want to make sure that you're carrying the theme, the through line of the theme through everything. So basically, the principle is, and everybody works differently. Some people are Mozartian in the way they write. Mozart could just had full symphonies and full concertos done in his head, and he was just writing them down. And then some people are like Beethoven, who was also a musical genius, but would sit down and write in fits and starts. So he'd write something and go, I don't like that, and he'd write it again. I don't like that, and he'd write it again. He'd throw it all away, and he'd start all over again. And so we have both kinds of writers on Odyssey, and every individual writer is at some point a Mozart and at some point a Beethoven. And so it just really depends on the nature of the show, and it depends on the subject matter and how we want to present it.
Mm-hmm. One episode that we'll get to Jungle Jam in a moment, but sort of had the brush of the Phil Lollar comedic genius was Hidden in My Heart. Especially Star Trek, which is a hilarious Star Trek parody. So what went into that skit, Star Trek?
Yeah, well, I grew up watching I grew up in the '60s, so I watched all of those television shows. Those were my formative years, and Star Trek was huge for me, because it was such a great show when I was a kid. There was nothing like anybody had ever seen before. And so I grew up watching all of that and putting all of that in my brain, and trying to reconcile all the stuff that went in that with the worldview that I have, the Christian worldview that I have, and everything else. And so when you get the chance to do your own program, you're going to draw on all those things that you used to do all the time, all the characters that you used to do. And because I'm also, I also do voice acting myself, then I decided, there's certain things that I would like to be able to do in that respect. And so, whenever I got the chance to play a character on Odyssey, I would jump at it, and then and that parlayed into doing lots of different characters, lots of different voice characters, and everything else, which I've done on several different shows now, and not just in the Christian realm, but also in the secular realm as well. So, but that was always a lot of fun. You always draw on things that you liked when you were younger, or when you're doing stuff like this. You always go kind of draw on your background, and so it's really good to have a varied background. Read as much as you can, watch as many shows as you can, watch movies and stuff, because you're going to draw on that stuff anyway.
Yeah. Another one, the sort of like mini arc of BTV, how it gets started. I forget the guy that ran the TV station, but he gets Bernard Walton on to find somebody to replace Soapy Waters.
Right.
And there are all these hilarious skits of from 90s TV shows. Like there was one that was Blarney the Rhinosaur, which was Barney. Then there was some Power Ranger one. I
Yeah.
mean, it was
Yeah.
really, really kind of just over the top and really fun. But
Yeah. That definitely comes from the warped side of my brain, which is very much, I love the parody of that, to be able to take stuff like that on. And probably, as you get older, you go, well, I probably shouldn't have been so insulting to some of that. I mean, they were trying to do their best. They were doing their, those folks were doing their shows in the way they wanted to, in the best way they knew how, and just like we do our show in the best way we know how. And so, but still, some things are just ripe for parody, so you do it anyway.
well, I mean, Star Wars is ripe for parody, but still, most people love it.
Oh yeah, sure.
So, I mean, a parody, it's almost like a coming of age. Like until you've been parodied, you haven't really made it the big time yet.
It's true. That's true.
You've got to get parodied first. But you mentioned that you were heavily involved with the Regis Blackard saga. So, what can you tell me about what went into the creation of Regis Blackard, and what went into his creation? How did he become a sort of arch nemesis of John Avery Whitaker?
Well, we did. We used to have little like bullies or villains on the show occasionally, but they were always just in one episode, and usually it was a kid. And so at one point we sat down and said, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to, where are we taking the show? What are we going to do with it? And we thought, well, I don't remember who it was specifically that came up with the idea, but the idea of saying Wit needs a nemesis. Wit needs somebody who can counter him, and be doing nefarious things and doing bad things. And so that it was sort of like out of those conversations that we were taking notes. And I think Paul actually wrote down that he said that he had a character named Jonathan Dark or something like that he had written in his notes. That's what he named him, and that was from Ray Bradbury's story, Something Wicked This Way Comes. And so I was thinking, well, I would love to be able to create a character, and a lot of what I do is when I'm creating stuff is I like the symbolism of it. So I was looking, and I did some research and came across a character from ancient Roman history. One of their ancient deities was called Janus. And Janus is the guy who has two faces, and the two faces are looking away from each other. So it's opposite sides of his personality. And Janus can be this character who is very ingratiating. He's very wonderful. He can he's charming, and you love him, and you think he's a wonderful guy, and then he'll turn on you immediately. And I thought that's what I'd really love the character to sort of be. And so when I really set about trying to make this character put flesh on the bones, we went back and forth with a lot of stuff. And Paul had written the impetus for a lot of this was the applesauce episode. And then I thought, well, let's take the applesauce episode and see if we can really extrapolate it into something bigger and bigger and bigger and better and whatnot. And that's where we started going back and forth with that. And out of that came Dr. Regis Blackard. And he has all sorts of course, machinations in his brain. He was very Machiavellian. He was constantly conniving and planning stuff. And so we went through the whole saga with him. And he's making a comeback. He's making a comeback. Yay, we're doing the whole Blackard saga. And I must tell you, there's some interesting stuff in doing this again and writing these books, because the whole story hasn't been told. There are other things that are going on with Blackard, and there may be something going on with Blackard that nobody ever realized, and that's going to be coming out, I think, in these books that we're writing. So,
Well, that's if this isn't any spoilers. The big question has always been: did Regis Blackard die at the end of the story arc? Because what happens is Jack Allen is down there at the secret, I think it's the Underground Railroad, right? That old tunnel,
sure. Yeah.
and he's cornered Blackard. And I think the self-destruct sequence has been set up or something, and the Wits End is ready to blow up. And so the next thing we know is that Jack Allen wakes up outside as if somebody had pushed him out, but nobody knows where Blackard went. So now maybe this is a spoiler and you can't reveal it, but I always thought that Blackard wasn't really dead. He got out with Jack. Can you say anything to that? Or
I no comment. No
okay,
comment. Sorry, you
okay,
have to wait to see.
okay. Yeah, we definitely have to. You have to definitely watch that. So yeah, the let me see here. I had some other episodes that I liked. Oh yes, the Twilight Zone, the one where you parodied the chicken. That was just over the top. That was hilarious. So what went into that? I mean, obviously it's a parody of the Twilight Zone, but that particular episode.
Well, there's a couple of things that are going on in that episode. Again, when you talk about the background of television growing up, so we have the Twilight Zone, which is parody on the Twilight Zone, and then you also have the chicken itself, which was the voice of Super Chicken, which is one of my favorite cartoons, Jay Ward stuff. So the basic thing that I wanted to deal with that, which I hope the theme comes out, is we wanted to do an episode about drug abuse, basically, about addiction. And how do you do that? How do you do it and make it so that it's not so heavy-handed? And how do you do it so that the point still gets across? And how do you do it on a show that's not going to allow you to show what true addiction is really like? You know, we have certain restraints on what we can do, just basically on how we can present things. And so I didn't want to do anything that was too heavy-handed, but I did want to show what it was like. And then, of course, you know, it's interesting that you use the phrase "over the top," because thematically, from a thematic standpoint, I'm assuming when you're talking about over the top, you mean ridiculously over the top, which is what I think addiction is. It's ridiculously over the top. Why would you do that to yourself? Why would you give yourself over to some ridiculous addiction? You shouldn't be doing things like that, because that's not how God made you. You know, be addicted to Jesus if you're going to be addicted to anything. So I think that's from a thematic standpoint, you can do it on a micro level, which is it's really silly for you to become addicted to a chicken, but addiction itself is always, a toy chicken. But addiction itself is also kind of a ridiculous thing. Just don't start down the path is the main thing. But yeah, that was a whole lot of fun to do. My favorite thing about that is every time I did the voice, Chuck Bolte would just laugh his head off, and Chuck has a very infectious laugh. So
wait, you were the chicken.
Oh yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So how did you get cast as Robert E. Lee?
Oh, wow. At which point? I don't remember doing Robert E. Did I do Robert E. Lee at some point?
Yeah, you were Robert E. Lee when I think it was the Assassination of Lincoln episodes, which
Oh yeah,
at the
yeah,
Appomattox Courthouse surrender.
yeah. And Chuck Bolte was the soldier who was trying to kill Grant too. That was Chuck Bolte doing that. You know what? I'll tell you honestly, part of that also stemmed from the fact that, believe it or not, you got to be in the right place at the right time sometimes. And that was a big cast. It was a very huge cast, and we'd cast all the major roles in it, but hadn't cast that one. And it was like, push comes to shove. Well, I'm going to go in and I'll do Robert E. Lee. So I'll figure it out. I'll figure out what I'm going to do and do Robert E. Lee, and we'll have somebody else do Grant, and we'll have somebody else do this and do that and everything else. And a lot of times it really was, you talk to anybody who was at Focus on the Family in those days, a lot of time it was me running down the hallways going, are you busy? Come into the studio. I got a voice I need you to do really quick. Come on, do something real quick. And that was me just running around the building going, come on in. Crowd sequences especially, it was all, put out the word, get everybody to come in, all of those crowd sequences, those humongous crowd sequences that you would hear in those history episodes or the early episodes, they were all Focus on the Family employees. They got to be in Odyssey episodes doing crowd stuff. So
Yeah. So what was the creative atmosphere like on an average day, if there was such a thing, on Focus on the Family Adventures in Odyssey headquarters?
Well, one thing that would you again, if you talk to Chuck Bolte, Chuck will tell you that the atmosphere was Paul and I wasting a lot of time doing a lot of talking. He would come into my office and I would go into his office and we would argue back and forth about things and we would talk and we would talk and we would talk and we would banter and we would this and we would that and we'd go back and forth. And meanwhile, so it was my office, it was Paul's office, and it was Chuck's office. Chuck, Paul, and my office. We were all. I think it was like that. Maybe it was Paul, me, and Chuck. But anyway, we're all three lined up in a row, and then you go around the corner and through a couple of doors, and there was the studio, and that was in Pomona. And so we were constantly going into each other's offices. Paul and I were, and we were talking about stuff. When Paul wasn't on the phone, that was a big deal. Paul was usually on the phone talking to somebody. But we would talk. We would go back and forth, and we would talk and talk and talk and talk. And finally, Chuck would come around the corner and say, "I don't hear any writing. You got to be writing. Why aren't you writing?" We're like, this is the creative process. We've got to be able to work this stuff out. Okay, I mean, and I'm only saying that half facetiously. We're not, part of it was, yeah, okay, whatever. We're just jawing with each other. But a big part of it was that's how we process stuff. That's how we were able to talk. Even though it seemed like we weren't talking about Odyssey stuff or specific stories, that was just kind of how we processed things creatively. We were both, we both kissed the Blarney Stone, where both of us have lots to say to each other all the time. And to this day, when I go back to Colorado Springs for meetings, I'll have dinner with Paul, and we are talking until 2 and 3 in the morning, and we don't even realize it. We're just talking about stuff. And that's who we are. That's the way we process stuff, and that sparks our creativity, I think, in a lot of ways. That really sparks our creativity, just the banter back and forth and the iron sharpening iron.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Too bad none of that was recorded. That might make a nice blooper reel.
I don't know if anybody would be interested in the things that we were.
So how did you come to create Jungle Jam and Friends?
Well, actually, I was one of the co-creators of Jungle Jam and Friends, the radio show. But I want to make it clear that Jeff Parker and Nathan Carlson created Jungle Jam separately from what we did on the radio show. So basically, Jeff came to work at Focus on the Family a couple of years after Odyssey was going. Jeff had written, I think Jeff wrote one or two of the episodes around that time period. The Barkley Ski Vacation, I think, was one of his episodes. And Nathan was the voice of Richard Maxwell. And so he came in doing stuff. I think actually prior to Jeff coming, I don't remember which one. I don't remember how our association worked at first. But Nathan, of course, is a fantastic voice actor. He can do many voices. We tapped him for Richard Maxwell. We tapped him for a lot of some other things as well. And then Jeff came on. Jeff's very talented writer, very talented comedy writer. I don't know that Jeff was all that interested. I think he was kind of interested in doing stuff on the dramatic side too, but I think he really wanted to learn more about how audio stuff works in general. So he did Odyssey stuff, and he would do other things around Focus as well. And meanwhile, on the side, Jeff was doing. He had created Jungle Jam. Jeff and Nathan had created Jungle Jam, and we became good friends. And while we were all there. And I said, this should be a radio show. We should do this on a weekly basis. I don't remember if I was the one to spark that or not, but the memory that I have is we ought to be doing these things on a more regular basis. And Jeff said, okay, well, how? And so we sat down and started talking about what we're going to do in terms of making Jungle Jam. And fortunately, right at that point, Wayne Zeitner, who was worked, I believe, at Word or at Tommy Nelson or one of those places, said, "Yeah, let's expand it into a more regular series. Let's see if we can get it on the radio, get it out there on a more regular basis." Which means that we suddenly had a second series that we were doing on the side, and that was Jungle Jam. And so it was a very busy time at that point. That was right after Focus had moved. Focus had left California and went to Colorado, and I stayed behind, and Jeff Parker stayed behind, and Nathan Carlson stayed behind. And so I was sort of the liaison for Odyssey in California, but we were also doing Jungle Jam at the time. And so we had lots of laughter-filled long nights where we would come up with stories and story ideas and pound them out and then start pounding scripts out. And then Jeff had a studio in his home, much as I have right now. It's the same kind of studio, but he had one in his home, and we started doing the shows. We started recording them and putting them out there. And a big part of Jungle Jam was the music. So we've had Buddy Miller and Julie Miller writing a lot of the songs, and we sang a lot of the songs on there, and used the songs from the albums that they had already done in the regular weekly show, and then started creating new stuff and just putting stuff out there, see what works. So that's sort of how that whole thing came to pass. I'm sure there are a lot of details I'm missing, but
Sure. Yeah. Growing up, the only Jungle Jam album that I really listened to, because I was a kid, I didn't get to pick which ones we listened to, was the Jungle Jam and Friends, and I still have it. More Wild Times in God's Creation. Look at that, vintage, vintage. Um,
some stuff. Good for you.
I know it's like over 20 years old, and I still have it. I can't believe
Yeah.
it.
Well,
But
they're great.
it's classic. But some of the episodes that I remember from that, the clunking one again was the whole drug parody again. But what I couldn't believe, this is for a kids show, you had Miller die. I was like, well, you killed the monkey? Like, okay, I mean, you had the chicken in Odyssey, but nobody got killed. But like, literally, Miller dies. I'm like, what?
But not really.
Well, not really. Wait, yeah, who voiced Miller the monkey?
Um, that would be, let's see, a guy who's really good at that stuff, named Phil Lollar. So that would be me.
So yeah, you were the monkey. Well, he didn't really die, but he died in the skit.
Yes.
And that's, for a little kid, that's kind of scary. Because, he's like, clunking's okay, don't worry about it. Then, bam, Millard's in the hospital. Then, bam, Millard goes terminal. I'm like, whoa, did not expect that to come. But,
Did that really, I'm curious now, did that really, like, scare you? Did that really,
well,
was that
okay,
really?
I'm trying to remember back when I was like 12, but that was I listened to it again, and I'm like, wait a minute. I was kind of even surprised that made it into a kids radio show. I mean, not now it's not scary, but I could see it being scary back then. What was scary when I was little was when Millard and Sully get that scary voice over the phone.
The scary, yeah, dial in for monkey.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was scary when I was little. But
yeah,
so
I'm coming
who created?
out today.
So who created the Razzleflabbins and Razzleflabbin Island?
That was again primarily Jeff, but as we were getting Jungle Jam going on the radio, we realized that we also needed, because they had done that was actually Jeff and Nathan. They had done an album of the Razzleflabbins too, and they were doing that while we were doing everything else. They were also kind of doing that. That was also a separate record album too that had songs on it and whatnot. And in fact, on that album, that was called Red and Yellow, Black and Plaid. Plaid Alert, Plaid Alert. I remember that one really well. But I do most of the voices on the Beach Birds when they sing "Good Good Morning." I'm singing that song. That's pretty much me. But that was a lot of fun too. Yeah, so that came about at the same time, and so we thought, well, when we're going to do the radio show, let's do one 11-minute story that's a Jungle Jam show and one 11-minute story that's a Razzleflabbin show, and let's send Katie and Marvy off into the Razzleflabbin Island each time to learn some sort of lesson of things that are going on the Razzleflabbin Island, and that was so much fun to do because the Razzleflabbins could be anything we wanted them to be, and they could be doing anything we wanted them to do on this little teeny weeny island, because it's all imagination. Every bit of it is imagination. And Jeff's niece played Katie, and she would actually come up with great story ideas. Katie should go to Razzleflabbin. She was very young at the time. Katie should go to Razzleflabbin Island and do this. And Katie should go to and Jeff would go, yeah, that's a really good idea for a story. We should write that out. So we'd write it out, and then she'd go do it. So, but that was always a lot of fun too. Yeah, looking back on that, sometimes I look back on that era and I think, wow, the amount of voices that we did. There were only 2 voices on these shows. It was Nathan and myself who did all of those voices, except for the female voices who came in occasionally. But it was only 2 voices on the show. Nathan and I did all the voices. Nathan did more than I did even. He was most of the major characters were Nathan. But I did Millard and had Millard was my signature character. And then Millard, of course, ended up being very popular, and Gruffy Bear and Millard the monkey ended up going after each other all the time. And so Gruffy and Millard are sort of like this comedy team that go out and do stuff together. And it's a lot of fun.
So if it's just the 2 of you guys were a regular Belle Blanc.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the idea. That's the idea. You know, the idea was how many of these voices can we do? How many? What? How much creativity do we have in us, and how can we shade our voices? And if you're a voice actor and you want to do this stuff, that's what you have to do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Have to be able to do lots and lots and lots of different voices. So Jess Harnell, for instance, who plays Wooten on Odyssey, does tons and tons of voices. I mean, he's everywhere doing everything. And so in order to be able to survive as a voice actor, if that's what you want to do, you just have to cultivate tons and tons of voices.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how did the idea of Marvy and Katie always getting washed out to the high seas, like where did that sort of trope come from? Was it from a television series, or is it something you just created on the fly?
Well, I think it's a lot of different things that come to play. Again, you draw on all your backgrounds, the background of everything you see. So there's a little bit of Gilligan's Island in it, and a little bit of you know Treasure Island in it, and a little bit of classics, and a little bit of everything else. But the brilliance of it, I thought, was how do we get the water into how do we get them to do it? So the very first thing was Jeff just saying he went to bed. Oh, another one would be Where the Wild Things Are, Maurice Sendak's book, because he goes into the bedroom. The kid there goes into the bedroom, and he goes and then takes off into an island adventure. And so, but the very first one, of course, is him just going to bed because he gets in trouble, and then he has a dream and he gets washed out to sea. And then after that is, well, what else can we do? Because does he always have to be going to bed? Does it always have to take place in his room? Is that the only way he can get into Razzle-Flabben Island? And then we thought, well, no. Why can't it be that he's at a picnic one day and he spills a glass of water, and the water gets bigger and bigger and suddenly washes everything out, and it takes the picnic table and washes them out to sea? You know, why can't it be anything? Running a bath in the bathtub, doing dishes in the sink, anywhere running water is happening, he has the potential of going into his imagination and going out to sea. And of course, a psychologist these days would describe that as some sort of mental disorder. But we just liked it because it was a fun little dramatic device.
Well, one of the things that I remember fondly from growing up listening to Jungle Jam was me and some of my friends, we really liked the episode with Peaceful. And we would always try to sing the song the way the Turtles did it.
Sure. Sure.
It was great. I mean, we would just start jamming like the Turtles were, Sure. It was fun.
Again, full credit to Nathan Carlson. He did most of the musical stylings on the show too. And Nathan is brilliant at doing different musical styles and forms. And then when they needed other singers, they would bring in. He was great at bringing in other vocalists who could handle any kind of jazz or any kind of bebop or any kind of whatever else that they were doing, whatever style they were doing. Nathan could do, and he was an expert at that. And so that's all Nathan. He was great at it.
So, what led to the picking of a jungle, and how are the creatures like Gruffy and Nozzles and Millard and Folly, like what went into their creation?
Again, Jeff did a lot of that before I ever started working with him. But for me, my explanation is this: forests are cute, jungles are funny. So that would be for me that would be the concise explanation of why a jungle. Forests are cute. You have cute animals jumping in the forest doing fun things. Jungles are funny. Forest Friends just sounds cute. Jungle Jam, well, a jam is a jam session. It's like a musical session. So it's a jungle jam and friends. And friends are the Razzle-Flabbens and everything else that we decided to do. Sing along with Bert the Moose. That was another part of the scenario. So Sing Along with Bert the Moose came about because Word, who was financing us, had other products that they wanted to get out. And Bert the Moose was able to introduce those products to everybody. So the deal was that we would make every fourth episode, we would take half of the episode and introduce a new Word product that was coming out. So, and most of the time we would actually enhance the songs and stuff that we got from the new products with Jungle Jam characters. So just to make, we put in, for instance, one of my favorite ones was, I don't remember the product, but I remember the song. Somebody was, it was a series about teaching young kids basic skills like the song that I remember is Tying Your Shoes. Or no, which order which order you put which order you put on. You do your socks first and shoes, and the song was socks on first, shoes on second, socks on first, shoes on second. And we were listening to it, and we thought, well, we can enhance this a little bit. So let's create some background bears. And so the background bears were saying socks on first, shoes on second. And I thought that was so much fun to do, just enhancing all of those little, what's a narthex? That's one of my favorite things that we had. What's the, we had a lot of fun with Sing Along with Bert the Moose. That was a lot of fun.
Well, growing up, one of my parents' favorite episodes was the Kitty Baked Cake Oven on Spiven Island.
Yeah, yeah. With all of the eat cake, eat Katie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we recently re-listened to it.
I'll give you a little memory on that one too, which is one of my favorite memories, and one of the times when I sincerely would love to relive over and over again. It's when we're trying to explain. I don't remember exactly when it comes in the script, but at one point, somebody says something. Some of those guys, they say something, and Katie counters it, and I ad-libbed, "Thought made self clear." Thought made self clear. And Jeff Parker nearly fell over laughing. He was laughing so hard, and that made me laugh, and that made Nathan laugh, and the rest of us, for the rest of the night, we were useless. We just kept laughing because it was so absurd. That memory and that ad lib was so absurd, and it struck us as so funny that we couldn't get any work done for the rest of the night. Literally for the rest of the night, it was just every time we tried to do something, we'd think thought made self clear, and it just fell apart. Everything fell apart. So we didn't get much done that night, but that's the kind of thing that went on all the time. We had so much fun doing that show. It was so creative and so much fun and so funny. We just laughed our rear ends off every single night. It was a blast.
Sounds like it. So were you the narrator as well?
No, that was Nathan.
Okay, were you one of the Razzleflabbins?
I was.
Okay, now you gotta do this. You gotta do a Millard Monkey line and then a Razzleflabbin line.
Hi, this is Millard the Monkey here. How are you? Jungle Jam Friends Radio Show. Ha ha. Hi. It's all beautiful. And then let's see. I think I played Carl. It was Carl. I was the Razzleflabbin Carl. And so Carl would be, yes, he was very much like this. He was very much, yes, hello and welcome, Carl. We thought it was so funny to name him Carl because on the album, there's a song called Love and Kindness on the album, with Love and Kindness Are in Your Heart. And that's a duet that Carl and Olaf sing. And Olaf does most of it. And then he hands it off and he says, "Take it, Carl." And we thought that was hilarious too. And then Carl sings in this beautiful operatic tenor, "Listen to your heart, listen to the Father." And then Olaf joins him in this beautiful harmony at the end. "If love and kindness are in your heart." So we again, just so much fun. All of that was just a blast.
That was from the episode where Marvy realized the Great Rubber Band War, right?
Yeah, the Great Rubber Band War.
That's right. That was pretty hilarious. But so what did I say here?
Marvy's great line in that one is, that I think Carl says, either Carl or Olaf says, "I have a rubber band here and I know how to use it." And Marvy says, "I've been watching you. You don't know how to use it." He snaps himself. Ow, ow, ow.
Yeah. Jungle Jam was pretty hilarious. It was good times. Now your more recent project that you've been working on is Iliad House. Now
Yes.
I heard that it had sort of a rocky beginning.
Yeah, Iliad House actually was an idea that I had a long time ago, many years ago, as a spin-off on Adventures in Odyssey. Odyssey, Iliad, yay. Okay, so sue me, I like Greek poets. Yeah, and so I thought what would happen was we would take certain characters. The whole thinking behind it was we have Adventures in Odyssey, and it's for 8 to 12-year-olds. And Focus on the Family, just from a product standpoint, has a lot of material that they use for preschoolers and elementary school students. We have Adventures in Odyssey for 8 to 12-year-olds going through junior high. And then we drop everybody. There's nothing for anybody from high school up until they become young adults and start their own families, when the whole process starts over again. And I thought, well, what we need to do here is we need to do something that encapsulates the teenage years, that we can get, from junior high, high school and early college age. And I thought, well, why don't we do a spinoff on Odyssey and call it Iliad House? Let's take Jason, let's take Connie, let's take Eugene and Katrina, and let's put them at Campbell County College, and we'll put them in a place. Jason can be the college, the college advisor for a fraternity on campus called Iliad House. This place, and so they would have all sorts of adventures, but they would be older adventures. We would get them involved in things that high schoolers and college students at the time would be thinking about and worrying about. And for various and sundry reasons, that didn't come about. It started to, and then it didn't, and things didn't happen, and it happened, and it didn't happen, and then it just didn't. It ended up being put on the shelf. But I kept all the ideas. I kept all the stuff. And so then it changed dramatically. It changed a lot, except for the concept of Iliad House by itself. That house was very intriguing to me. And so, so years later, fast forward years later, I'm dealing with some folks at the homeschooling folks, HSLDA. I go to their convention. I talk to people about stuff and everything, and we're saying, why don't we do a show together if it's possible to do an audio drama together? Can we do it? Can we raise funds on Kickstarter? Can we do all that sort of stuff? And so what will the show be? And I thought, I'm pulling Iliad House out, but I have to revamp it to take anything that's Odyssey related away, because I can't do any of that. But then I started creating Iliad House. So I sat down and said, okay, you know what? Let's do Iliad House. There we go. Iliad House. And ended up, it took a long time, raised the capital, but took a long time to produce. So I had to do it on the side and all by myself. But I loved doing it. I loved every bit of doing it. It was a lot of fun to do. And then Iliad House. So Iliad House becomes about a kid who's a little bit older than the Odyssey target audience. Jesse is a little bit older than that, and his friends, and this train that they find that actually ends up being a time machine, and they can travel back in time. And not only that, they're on this special island called Verity Island, and at the tip, it's off the eastern seaboard of the United States, and at the southern end of the southern tip of the island is this place called Iliad House. And Iliad House is where Jesse's mysterious uncle lives. He's a professor, Professor Portalis. And strange and unusual things go on at that house, and strange and unusual things go on at the island. And if we can continue bringing them to you, continue making them, the time traveling train is only the tip of the iceberg of what actually happens in this place. So we want we're planning on doing lots of different things. It's just a matter of funding and time.
Yeah. Now, I heard that there were 2 Kickstarters for Iliad House. The first one didn't quite meet the expectations. How did that affect what you could put into the actual release product?
Well, it didn't affect the quality of the stories, or it didn't affect any of that, because I'd already started writing them, and I'd already started putting everything together in the way I wanted it to be put together. And so as far as that's concerned, that's just on me. The only thing that it really affected was the time on releasing it. So if we had gotten funding, the amount of money that we wanted on the first Kickstarter campaign, we would have been able to do this a lot faster. But there's an old adage in show business, pretty much any product placement, product development, which is good, fast, and cheap. Pick 2. Pick 2. You can't have all 3. You can't have good, fast, and cheap. You got to pick 2. So we picked good and cheap. Those were the 2 that were sort of forced on us, actually. Which means you don't get it fast. It just takes a longer amount of time, because everybody else has things to do. We all have to make a living as well. We all have to make sure our bills are paid, and mortgages and car payments and all that sort of stuff. And so it just takes more time to be able to put a product out. And so now what we're hoping is that it'll pick up more speed and more steam, and more people will know about it. And the more people who know about it, the more people we can get to purchase it, and we can put it out there and try to make things, try to make many, many more of them.
Now, you mentioned that initially you had conceived of Iliad House as being sort of an extension of Adventures in Odyssey. Was the casting of Katie Leigh as the ethereal voice partly a nod to that?
Sure. There are 2 prominent Odysseyites who do voices in the 3, if you count me, who do voices in the show. One is Katie, and the other is Chris Anthony, who plays Mrs. Lincoln in the show. And so, but everybody else, I tried to get some new voices. I tried to get a lot of my partners who I work with on Iliad House are the main characters. In fact, Ian Reed is the voice of Jesse, and he is really wonderful in it. And then Tracy Van Dolder. I don't know if you know who Tracy Van Dolder is. Tracy does. If you've ever been on YouTube and you see Adventures in Editing, Tracy used to take Adventures in Odyssey scenes from Adventures in Odyssey episodes, the soundtracks, and she would act them out, and she would play all the characters. So she would get costumes and stuff. So I mean, they're all on YouTube, so you can go and see what she does, and they're really wonderful. And I started talking with her about different things. She's got a series, an audio series that she calls Witnesses, that she's working on. That's coming out too. She lives up in Canada, but she's a very talented person. And I said, I'd really like you to try this. She didn't want to do it. She was like, I don't think I can do that. I don't mind like doing mouthing voices that other people do, but I don't know if my voice is gonna. I said, no, come on, and finally coaxed her into it, and she's fantastic. I love what she does with her character. So. It was a wonderful experience. I really loved it. I loved listening to it. Still, even now, it's been out for about a year. This first season of 6 episodes been out about a year already, and it's available at www.iliadhouse.com. You can listen to the first episode for free. It's right there on the website, and you can hopefully order it, purchase it down. It's.
But I was gonna say, was any of this influenced by Timeline, the 2003 movie with Gerard Butler?
No. But I will say this about doing any kind of time travel shows. The Iliad House was based on a script that I had written as a thesis project for my master's degree, and part of that script involved a great deal of research into the very things you're talking about, the problems involved with time travel. And the paradoxes that happen. And there are all sorts of paradoxes that people can experience in time travel and in time travel stories. And it can drive you absolutely insane when you're trying to write it, because you think, well, if this has happened, why this? How come this happened? Well, why didn't they just do this? Why didn't they just do that? How come they just didn't go back further? How come they didn't go back in the future more? How come they didn't do this? And so you spend a great deal of time when you're doing time travel scripts trying to solve those paradoxes, trying to logically solve those paradoxes to the satisfaction of listeners. So, or people who are watching movies. So, for instance, in the movie The Terminator, you figure out ways to get people to stop thinking about this stuff, because you still have to suspend your disbelief and say, let's go with it. All right. So in The Terminator, for instance, there's a really great example of this. In the movie The Terminator, you have this machine that comes back, this robot that comes back in time, trying to kill the mother of the boy who's going to grow up to be the man that leads a rebellion against the robots. And she, at the very end of the film, she's on her way to Mexico because she knows that a storm is coming, and she's at the gas station, and she's recording tapes to give to her future son. She's pregnant with the future savior of the world. She's pregnant with him, and she's recording tapes to give it to him. And one of the things that she says, she starts talking about, do I tell you about your father? Well, as it turns out, if I don't tell you about your father, then you may not send him back in time, and he can't become your father, which is a time paradox. If he doesn't go back in time, you can't be born. You can't be born, you can't save the world, which means that he can't come back in time to have you be born. Oh, and she says, a person could go crazy thinking about this. And at that point in the movie, everybody who's watching goes, you're absolutely right. Forget about thinking about it. Just enjoy the movie. Let's just enjoy the story. So we try to do the same kinds of things in time travel episodes. Well, in this particular thing, in this particular script that I was trying to write, I was trying to solve all those things. I was trying to get a story that put a unique spin on time travel, so that time travel in most time travel stories is a means to an end. The real thing that everybody is thinking about is what takes place in the past or when you go into the future. That's where the real story takes place. And time travel is just a means to an end. You're just using it to get there. I wanted to make time travel an end in itself, which is why I did this. That's the thing to remember when you're listening to Iliad House. If you haven't heard it, time travel is an end in itself, and that gives you a clue as to why things happen the way they happen in that show. So, I mean, all that is a very long-winded way of saying that listen to it and have fun with it.
Yeah. What was the inspiration for Charles Portalis?
Well, again, I like a lot of symbolism in films and in stories that I write. Portalis is a way. Portalis is a play on the word portal, which should give you a clue as to who he is. Okay, Verity Island. Verity means truth. The Verity River you have to cross between Verity City and Verity Island. There's a little river that you have to cross between the two. So all of these things kind of come into play. I'm very big on doing stuff like that, trying to give meaning to names. Sometimes I can go overboard with it, I know, but I really enjoy that. Iliad Odyssey is that way. Odyssey means a certain thing. If you read the Odyssey, you'll understand what the Odyssey is. A very unique and special journey. Iliad House, the poem The Iliad, is all about warfare. It's all about taking on the bad things in the world, being heroic and brave and taking on the bad things in the world. So all of those things come into play when you're starting to map out a series and map out a show and all that other stuff. So that's kind of what my thinking was. So Professor Portalis is a portal.
Now, Cassandra, of course, is a Greek name, and that's the prophetess of Troy from the Iliad.
Right.
Is there a double meaning to her character there?
Well, that's actually put into. I don't want to spoil it, but that's actually a pivotal point in her character arc. It's one of the things that happened. Her name is actually explained at one point in the series, and so again, you need to listen to it to get the full meaning out of her name. But I named her Cassandra for a very important reason.
God willing, what other avenues would you explore in Iliad House?
Well,
if you were given the opportunity.
If we can, the island itself has a lot of very interesting things that happen in it. There's the ruins of an old Native American village in it, and that plays out that also contributes to this series too. But there's a very old fort there is one of the first settlements in America from Europe. So there's a lot of things and just the nature of the island itself, the way the island is shaped and the way Iliad House is built on that island. I want to examine and explore more of that, more of the supernatural part of it, I think, than anything else. I'd really love to explore just the nature of who Charles Portalis is and the nature of why he and Jesse are on this island. There's a very specific reason, important reasons for why they're on the island, and part of it has to do with the voice, played by Katie Lee.
Okay, well, we're about out of time. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
Oh, just get Iliad House. Yay, get Iliad House. Please go on to Iliad House, and please, anybody who's watching this, get the new Blackard books are just being released right now. This one's out now. It's available, and book 2 should be available shortly, within a couple of weeks. And then hopefully we'll get all of the rest of it. This tells the story that we couldn't tell on the radio. It tells part of it. That the radio part is included in here, but there's a lot of other things that are going on, and so these are really, really fun. This is going to be a very fun read. And it's gotten a lot of good feedback on this so far, and so it tells a whole lot of the stuff. You talked about Philip Glossman at the very beginning. Philip Glossman is here. We get his backstory in this book, so find out about it. And also do if you have a chance. Pick up a copy of the New Adventures in Odyssey Bible. It's been redone completely, and it's a really special Bible, and it's really good. So tell everybody about it. Get your copies of it. Go to focusonthefamily.com, and they will help you out with all of these things, except for Iliad House, to go to iliadhouse.com to get Iliad House. So that's it for now.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Phil. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.